Hi, Ambassadors. I'm Paul Lavoie, Connecticut's Chief Manufacturing Officer. Welcome to the State of Manufacturing webinar series. I'm very excited about today's guest. Today we have Ari Santiago, CEO of Compass MSP and the host of Made in America with Ari Santiago, the premier manufacturing podcast. Ari, welcome.
Paul, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Great, we're looking forward to it. So Ari, I've been on your podcast 4 times, and now I'm telling you it's great to be able to turn the tables on you and to be able to have me ask the questions of you. So,
well, here we go. Here we go. Buckle up, everybody.
All right. So Ari, before we get started, listen, I'd like to bestow upon you a new title for you, and that title is of Connecticut's original manufacturing ambassador. So you have been spreading the good news about manufacturing in the state of Connecticut since 2019. So I have for you the official Ambassador State of Connecticut pin and want to share that with you as Connecticut's original manufacturing ambassador.
Manufacturing Ambassador 001. I love it. Thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. So Ari, before we get started, tell the ambassadors a little bit about yourself. Tell them a little bit about Compass MSP, and then also we're really interested to know what's the catalyst for you to launch the Made in America with Ari Santiago podcast?
Well, listen, I think you start a little bit about me. Born and raised in Connecticut, minus time spent at Tufts and living in Boston a little bit. I've lived in Connecticut my entire life and seen manufacturing buildings all throughout the state, right? It's impossible to live in Connecticut without seeing manufacturing everywhere. And I started an IT business about 21 years ago in the state, and over time started serving customers in the manufacturing space. And so I'm the CEO of Compass MSP now. We're a multi-state, 260 plus employee IT business. And we help businesses like manufacturers with their network, cybersecurity, CMMC compliance, general help desk, getting all their machines connected, all the IT stuff that a manufacturing company needs. So we got to know these manufacturers. And in the 2010s in particular, I was hearing from our clients, they were not struggling with business, they were struggling with supporting all the business, right? And so where were they going to get the employees from? There was a big gap between the reality of manufacturing sector and what the public perceived it. And that public was everybody. It was students, parents, politicians, non-manufacturing business people for the most part. And so just through a series of conversations, it became clear no one was telling this story. And I tried to encourage other people to do it. And at one cocktail party, someone said to me, if you think it's such a good idea to tell these stories and they're so good, why don't you do it? And I said, you know what? I will do it. And so that was sort of the challenge accepted. And so that was the genesis of the Made in America podcast, and committed to do it one manufacturer a week for a year. 52 was the goal. But I just had so much fun and learned so much and just became passionate about doing it for fun and as a hobby that we're, 4 years and counting. It's great.
Well, and you stuck with it through the pandemic by doing it virtually.
Yes.
As well during the pandemic. So
manufacturers had to pivot. We pivoted with them. It was great.
I think I remember one of the episodes you had Senator Chris Murphy
on
virtually.
We did.
Virtually. So yeah, during that time period. Well, in talking about that, this has been going on strong now for, since 2019. So you're on coming around your 4th year on the podcast, and you've produced over 196 podcasts, and which means you've talked to a significant amount of manufacturing leaders. I don't think I've caught up to you yet. So with my L4 visits. I don't think I'm up to 196 yet, but I'm working hard to get there. But what I'd like you to do, Ari, is share with the ambassadors, 3 of the most interesting things that you've learned about manufacturing here in Connecticut.
All right. Well, I got to think of 3, Paul. So I'll try and keep it to 3. I would say the first thing that struck me is the breadth and depth of manufacturing that still exists in Connecticut. I mean, it's really impressive. You know it, you see it in the L4 tour, people that listen to the podcast know. I mean, it's literally everything from snack food and beverages, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic, to nuclear submarines and jet engines and a lot of stuff in between. And I think coming into it, my experience had been, okay, there was a smattering of things here and there, but it was predominantly aerospace and defense. I mean, medical device manufacturing in Connecticut is enormous.
Big, very big, yeah.
So is printed circuit boards and electronics. And in fact, one of the biggest factories that makes the machines that make the chips that goes into all the iPhones and Samsungs is right here in Connecticut in Fairfield County. I mean, it's just unbelievable the amount of stuff. And I mean, Fairfield County is another one. The idea that in Fairfield it was just finance. Oh, there was no manufacturing down there, but turns out there are. So that was one surprise, was just the breadth and depth of manufacturing. The second one, which maybe I knew a little, but it really was emphasized, is the passion that manufacturers have for manufacturing. I mean, it's more consistently will I see a manufacturer who's passionate about manufacturing than an accountant who's passionate about spreadsheets or a lawyer who's passionate about lawyering. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions or compare anybody, but I mean, it's when people talk about it, and you hear on the podcast, they say, manufacturing was in my bones or manufacturing was in my blood. I mean, there's just something about it, and I don't know, I've thought about it sometimes. Maybe it's the tactile nature of making something, but boy, are they passionate about it. And then the third one was really, I knew going in that there was upside in manufacturing, but the more I've dug in, the more I've come to believe how much upside there is from an industry perspective, from an opportunity perspective, that Connecticut could really take advantage of. I mean, I know you talk about it all the time. I don't know if we're going to talk about it today, but Industry 4.0. I remember, I think it was talking to Marty from Stanley Black & Decker on one of the podcasts that he said, the more manufacturing relies on your brain over your hands, right? There's always been a ratio, but the more it's about the brains, the more Connecticut can thrive. And I've just come to believe that more and more after talking to everybody. So breadth and depth, passion for manufacturing, and the ability to grow. Those are the three that have really stuck with me.
And it's interesting, in my visits and going out and talking to manufacturers, I'm continually surprised by the breadth and depth. And there's always this perception that Connecticut's all about aerospace. Right? So aerospace and shipbuilding. And to some degree, it's our largest customer, right? I mean, the federal government is our largest customer. Absolutely. Defense is our largest industry. But we continually get surprised with again, chemical processing companies, medical device companies, as you talked about. But just, and every day I learn a new one.
Right.
Pops up,
new businesses even starting, which you didn't think about, like Bright Feeds in Berlin. I don't know if you've been out there.
Sure, I've been there, yeah.
I mean, that's just really, talk about sort of a 21st century manufacturer, like very Gen Z, where they take like compost and then through a proprietary process, turn it into animal feed.
Correct, yeah.
I mean, it's just an amazing thing, and just sort of getting off the ground, this new frontier. And Connecticut's still involved in all the other stuff, batteries for Tesla, components for the iPhone, SpaceX, spaceflight. I mean, Connecticut's just got its hands in all the high value stuff. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, in the Artemis program, there are 41 Connecticut manufacturers involved in the Artemis, which is the sending astronauts back to the moon.
Connecticut was very integrally involved in the first trips to the moon, so no surprise we're back.
As we say, you can't fly without Connecticut.
That's right,
You certainly can't fly. And then, the passion, I'll talk a little bit about that. And, I find that as well. It just continually is encouraging. It's really very encouraging to people are really, and how many of the companies that you've had on are multi-generational companies?
It's funny you mentioned that. I was thinking about that. I didn't really mention it because maybe I knew there were some legacy companies. But I think about when we had Lyman Orchards on, which is more than just an orchard. They do all kinds of stuff, including
they make pies.
Pie manufacturing. Exactly. They've been continually in operation by the same family since before the United States was a country.
That's amazing.
I mean, like that's wild, right?
So, crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Multi-generational businesses all over the place. Satellite Tool was just on multi-generational. So lots of multi-generational businesses in Connecticut, and certainly that passed down one from the other. Maybe that's it's in your bones.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the third point that you talked about was the growth opportunities. So I know when I go around and talk with manufacturers, we're talking about very healthy backlogs, and we know what. Let's not assume that we know. When you're out there talking with manufacturers about growth, what are some of the things that are limiting their ability to grow?
Oh, it's funny. I think it was Jason Howie from OK Industries, I believe was podcast episode. Jason, I'm so sorry. I think it was 3, maybe 4, but it was early on. And this is 2019, pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And he said his team was just going to share with me his top 3 challenges.
Yeah.
And so I'll share them with you right now. Workforce, and workforce. And I think that's amazingly, despite going from 2019 into the pandemic, the depths, rising out of the pandemic, which fortunately, a lot of businesses struggled, but a number of manufacturers in Connecticut, because of medical device, because of the critical needs, because of the defense, whatever, have been able to survive or thrive through it. And then coming back out of it, that top 3 priority has remained consistent time over time. And I think it's because, not that you asked, but I'll share, I think it's for a few things. One, it's that perspective gap, right? I mean, so I graduated high school in 1995, and I mean, it's fair to say in Connecticut, West Hartford, nobody was talking about going into manufacturing. Even people whose families had manufacturing businesses. It just wasn't something people were encouraging you to do. And it didn't start with my generation, and it didn't end after it. So there's just this big gap of people that didn't think there was something there. So that sort of means you don't have the feeder stock, right? And people don't grow on trees, or certainly not quickly anyway, right?
So the cycle time on making a worker is 18 to 20 years.
Exactly. So, you said that, and
some of us are no longer in that business.
Exactly. Some factories are closed.
Some factories are closed.
So I think that's I think that's kind of really hampered our ability to generate the people that we need. And so I think we got to get creative. It's funny, I've just been thinking about this, and I haven't really talked about it, but I think I talked about immigration before, but if you take a step back and you look at some of the legacy manufacturing, I think of Colt. I think of Stanley Black & Decker in New Britain. And you think about what's around there. Why is New Britain known for having all this Polish influence? Yeah. Because these were the workers that came to work at Stanley. If you read about the history of Colt manufacturing, in the little villages by Colt, each of them were sort of segmented by the places they came from, and they would have celebrations like they had in the old country. Maybe it's time we rethink about how we could kind of leverage what is old can become new again. It's not just bell bottoms that can come back.
Well, and that's, that is part of the solution, right? I mean, part of the solution is that we don't have enough people, and having a solid immigration policy will bring us the people. And you're absolutely right. The manufacturing industry was built on immigrants. I mean, again, you go back to the cities and look at the enclaves, if you will, of people that grew up around there. And with the whole Ukrainian crisis, I said, listen, Middle Eastern manufacturing workers, bring them on.
Right.
I mean, I've had nothing but tremendous experience with folks that come from that background. So it absolutely is something at the national level that we have to figure out. The other thing I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, because I'm sure you've heard this as well, is we talk about workforce development, and then we talk about workforce growth, and immigration's part of that growth perspective and getting people back into the workforce and all of that. But there's another lane that really is starting to, I think, become more apparent, and that is workforce innovation. And that is, we talked a little bit about Industry 4.0, or mentioned it. That is how do we use technology to do the jobs for the places we can't get workers? So what are you hearing from manufacturers around workforce, just innovation, and how they can use innovation to increase productivity and efficiency?
Well, Industry 4.0 is a particularly exciting area for me because it sort of starts to marry my two passions, right? The manufacturing with the IT side.
Absolutely.
But I look at it as like this. In order to advance, civilizations have always relied on technology to do it, right? I mean, we don't make shoes the way they made shoes in the 1700s, thank God, right? And so we need to find how can we be more productive per employee. Now, that also means that we'll get more out of the workers so we can mitigate some of that risk. And there's absolutely no doubt about it that technology is the way to do it. And actually just hasn't released yet, but just interviewed today, in fact, Brian from Arthur G. Russell. And he's talking about the I-4.0 stuff they're doing, and that some of their customers have said, like, we can't operate the machines we bought from you guys because we don't have enough operators. And they created a scenario where they now have an offering that says, hey, you plug this into your network, we can securely remote in, we will monitor the machine, we will apply the artificial intelligence so that we can do predictive analytics and predictive maintenance, so we can help monitor and maintain that machine for you to make your facility productive, even if you can't find all the workers. I think that type of innovation is what we need. And I mean, the Industry 4.0 thing is really something we could spend more than the time we have on. But ultimately, what I see is this. It is about how can we make our workers more productive by giving them the technology and the tools, data analytics, robotics, the IIoT components, so that they can do more
Right.
You can get more stuff done, and upscale. That's what it is, and that's what manufacturing's been about for hundreds and hundreds of years. We just got to keep growing.
Yeah, and we're very much, we're a state of innovation, right?
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
we take a look at the, you talked earlier about, if you're using your brain more than your hands in manufacturing, and how Connecticut is well positioned for that. And we, that's our DNA. I mean, our DNA is really smart manufacturing and trying to figure out how we can be more productive and more efficient. So I want to put you on the spot a little bit here, right?
Uh-oh.
So, and let's see if you can, I know you don't like to pick favorites, but tell me what the most interesting company you interviewed has been.
Paul, I am extremely consistent in this answer. I'm very ready to answer this question. Do you have kids?
I do.
Yeah.
I have 4. Yeah.
Which one's your favorite?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I feel about these podcast episodes and the companies that we've worked with. They're all a little bit different. They've all got something unique and interesting. I love them all the same amount, but maybe not always in the same way. So we've had so many interesting ones. It would literally be impossible,
I'm sure.
to pick one. But I think, encourage people to go listen to them and see what's there, because you can learn an unbelievable amount. And I think people who listen to it would become generally passionate about Connecticut manufacturing. Yeah,
no, absolutely, and appreciate that answer. Everybody knows I've gone on this L4 tour, right? Before I wrote the strategic plan, I went out to visit as many manufacturers as I possibly could. Your podcast was part of that tour. That would be my Tuesday morning commute, was to, I'm going to sneak in another visit with a manufacturer by listening to that, and that's where we learn a lot of what's going on. So I certainly encourage the ambassadors to, if you're not already subscribed to Made in America with Ari Santiago, you should, because you'll get a weekly dose of some really interesting companies that are doing some really fantastic things in the state of Connecticut. I would have thought some of the breweries would be some of your favorites, or the food manufacturers. I've seen podcasts where they're coming in with, spirits and beer, and they're cracking open beers and doing all
I
that.
know.
I mean, come on.
I know. I was going to say, the only time I ever drank at work at 10 a.m. was on a podcast from Backey's Brewing, I think it was. Listen, it's amazing, and they're really, honestly, there's just so much, and I love to learn. I do, and I've been so blessed in my life and in my career to have so many people that have been willing to share experience and background and be there as a sounding board. You're one of those people, and I just feel like I've been able to learn so much, and I just try and impart some of that on the podcast. And honestly, I feel like every guest that comes on, I learn something new to take away. So that's like 196 pieces of learning that have made me better. So I just love the process. Yeah,
and one of the things I like that you do as well is you do these compilation programs where you'll take a theme and you take a theme and take some of the best ofs, some of those themes, and run those through like a little offshore
technology, onshoring, reshoring,
4.0. So and those are some really valuable ones. So Ari, this is our State of Manufacturing Ambassador Program. The Ambassador Program is growing. The idea behind it is to take the work you started, right, and then I've now, as Chief Manufacturing Officer, am amplifying, but is to create this group of people out there that are going to spread the word about manufacturing. So, from your perspective, what's important for our ambassadors to know about manufacturing? If you can give them a couple of things that, while they're out there and about talking about manufacturing, what are a couple of sound bites that you'd want to share with them?
Well, maybe I could just say one thing first about how important I think this is, because we've talked about that gap that was the workforce gap. That is the single most important thing we need to fill, is to change the perspective of what manufacturing is. Not change it to something that it's not.
Correct.
Just change it to what it actually is.
Right.
And
perception equal reality.
That's exactly right. And I think that's what the ambassadors are all about, right? When you want to get a restaurant recommendation or a new car or whatever, you want to ask your friends, you want to ask someone you know. And you're doing a great job getting out there, but you can't talk to everybody. So I view these ambassadors as little mini Paul Lavoies going out there, kind of sharing what's going on in manufacturing with the rest of the community. It is so crucially important. This program will do more to help our manufacturers than you and I can do, and they really need to be out there. So that's just my plug overall for it. In terms of what they need to know is, number one, we are not trying to tell what isn't the case. So I think just be honest about what it is, and when you don't know, just say you don't know. Don't make it up, right? That'd be number one. Number two is be educated broadly about just what does it mean to be lean, green, and clean, right? I mean, if you just understood what is lean, big picture, what is green? And I always look at the green, the governor said the double green, right? The environmentally friendly and the career financial opportunities you can make. If you just understand those two things, right? And then how it's clean in terms of your daily work environment, how it's clean in terms of the facilities, how it's clean in terms of the waste that we generate. If we could just understand those two things, the lean, green, and clean, I think that would go a huge, long way to helping the entire state of Connecticut and the country understand what manufacturing in Connecticut's really all about.
Yeah, and we have that happening on a couple of different levels, right? We have the Hearts and Minds advertising campaign, we have the ambassador program, we have podcasts. What we're doing is kind of braiding all these efforts that we have out there. So I'm excited about it. I think in the next couple of years we'll see a really seismic shift in how people feel about manufacturing and also the life-changing careers that are available for folks in manufacturing. So
it's one of those things that feeds on itself, Paul, right? So it's like we start the information, people are listening, they get the information, a couple people get a career started, they start telling some people, that starts to build on itself. So I think it's got some momentum already. And the nice part is, as I've been talking to people from the podcast, especially people that were on early that have come back, and I asked them, do you see a difference? Like, do you see something different when you go to a high school or an elementary school, or when you talk to kids at University of Hartford or Central or Middlesex community or Manchester community or whatever? Do you see a difference? And it isn't a sea change yet, but they are seeing a difference.
That's good.
And that little bit, that's the hope, Paul, right? And then we're looking for that hockey stick, right? So we're here, we got to just make the curve, And I think the ambassador program can be one of the things that
one mind at a time, right?
We're
going to change them one mind at a time.
Door to door, baby, door to
door.
door.
One question I want to ask you is, we have this opportunity in Connecticut around renewable energy and clean energy. And when the guests that you've had on, are you seeing any indication from companies that they understand what that opportunity is, or do you think the state needs to do a better job of communicating what's happening in the renewable and the clean economy space?
Going to have to be a better job, Paul. And maybe this is a little bit on me because I don't maybe bring it up. So, but it has not been brought up to me, at least recently, any sort of change of what it is. But certainly, finding a way to bend the curve on energy prices is an important thing, and I think ultimately we got to have more control, and renewables got to be part of that conversation. Yeah,
it's all this. I'm involved in offshore wind. I went to an offshore wind conference for the USA. There were 4,000 people at the conference. There were 400 companies exhibiting, and there is no offshore wind business in the United States. There's no industry. And I'm like, this something's coming. Something's coming. It's coming big. And I just didn't know if when I'm out talking to people, I'm telling them about it, but I didn't know if they, obviously it's not out there yet. So we got to do a better job of that. That's great. So that's great. So Ari, let's, anything else, any other information you think about what you learned in manufacturing or anything else that might be helpful for our ambassadors?
No, listen,
put a bow on this.
Put a bow. How do we tie this thing up, put it together?
Let's land the plane, right?
Let's land the plane. Sure. Listen, I think the ultimate thing is really, really appreciate people taking their time to be a manufacturing ambassador. I think it is this team and group of people that is going to make that difference. So it's just really what I said before, would say again, which is understand that lean, green, and clean, and just go out there and spread the story. You know what I mean? There's so many great stories to tell. Stealing from the podcast. Watch the L4 clips on LinkedIn. Manufacturer CT has a podcast. But, just get it kind of in the back of your mind. And what I found is once I know these things and they stay front of mind, conversations come up where they just sort of come out.
Sure.
And the thing I get all the time when it just sort of comes out is they'll say, wow, I didn't know that. I get that all the time. So I would just say, ambassadors, let's get going.
Excellent. All right. Well, ambassadors, thanks for listening today. And as you interact with manufacturers, please let them know and make it part of your weekly routine. They drop every Tuesday morning, right?
Every Tuesday morning.
Every Tuesday morning. Let them know about the Made in America with Ari Santiago podcast and the extremely important role that it plays in communicating the great news about our manufacturing sector. So, Ari, how do we get to your podcast?
How do we get to the podcast?
How do we get there?
Well, Easiest thing to do is most people that I know listen to a podcast on their phone.
Yeah.
So if you got an iPhone, it's in the Apple Podcast app. If you have a Samsung or Android phone, you can get it in Apple Play or Spotify. I think there's a way to you can also watch it on YouTube. So if people like to watch it, we do like the exact same thing you hear audio. You can watch it on YouTube. So YouTube, Apple Podcast, Google Play, or Spotify. Love to have them more
So if
listeners.
you can't find Made in America with Ari Santiago, you didn't look.
You did not look.
You did not look.
You did not look. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Should be easy to find. So Ari, thanks for joining us today on the State of Manufacturing webinar series that's here to support our ambassadors. We really, really appreciate you investing your time with us today and we're so grateful for everything that you're doing to make sure that we're changing the perception of manufacturing in Connecticut. So again, Ari, thank you very much. And ambassadors, let's take this information, let's go out there, let's spread the good news, and again, make it a great day.